A single whispered truth inside Windsor Castle set fire to the palace corridors. Princess Anne, long seen as the unshakable rock of the monarchy, had secretly chosen Catherine, not Camilla, not Charles, not even William, as her rightful successor. What began as little more than hushed murmurs among staff soon spiraled into the greatest royal storm of the modern era. The weight of Anne's name behind such a statement made it impossible to ignore. She was not prone to gossip, nor was she given to fanciful gestures. If Anne had spoken, it meant she had already decided, and that realization tore through the foundations of the palace with unforgiving force. Courtiers scrambled, desperate to understand how such a choice could have been made, and even more desperate to keep it contained. But the monarchy has never been able to bury its deepest secrets for long. Before the sun set, the headlines screamed with urgency. Anne names Catherine her successor. Newspapers plastered Catherine's face on front pages, framed not just as the Duchess of Cambridge, but now as the woman chosen by the most beautiful princess of the realm. The sudden shift shocked the nation. Some were in awe of Anne's boldness, hailing her as the guardian of Elizabeth's legacy. Others, however, saw it as betrayal, a ruthless dismissal of Camilla, and even of the king himself. Public opinion split like glass, shattering under pressure. On one side, crowds praised Catherine as the embodiment of Diana's spirit, warm, compassionate, and steadfast in her quiet service. They believed Anne had done what no one else dared. She had placed the crown back into the hands of someone the people truly adored. On the other side, voices of fury rose, loyal to Camilla and protective of Charles, accusing Anne of undermining the very structure of royal succession. The division became raw, emotional, and deeply personal, as if the monarchy itself were no longer a family, but a battlefield. And through it all, Anne's name carried weight. She had earned her reputation as the unshakable soldier of the monarchy, the one who worked tirelessly without fanfare. If she said Catherine was worthy, many believed it was not sentiment, but duty that had guided her hand. This gave her words a gravity that even Camilla's defenders struggled to challenge. For them, the fear was clear. If Anne was planting Catherine's name into the soil of succession, then perhaps she was planting it for the long game, one that could grow into something no royal decree could stop. Behind closed doors, Camilla's inner circle panicked. They whispered about betrayal, about Anne's arrogance, about how to undo the damage before it consumed everything. Charles, caught off guard, struggled to hold the fragile balance between his sister and his wife. But it was Catherine who found herself most unsettled, suddenly thrust into a storm she had never sought. She had lived in the shadow of expectation, but this was something far greater. She was being crowned by whispers, dragged into a war she had not declared, and she felt the crushing weight of it pressing in from every side. The world was watching, the palace was trembling, and Anne's declaration was only the beginning. For if her words had set fire to the corridors of Windsor, what lay beneath those flames was far more dangerous, far more revealing, and far more destructive than anyone could have imagined. But what drove Anne to such a bold and divisive move would take the world far deeper into the hidden fractures of the royal family. For decades, Anne endured Camilla's growing shadow, but behind the smiles was a war of silence, until now. Public rarely saw it, but those inside palace walls understood the tension that simmered whenever the two women crossed paths. Anne, with her sharp tongue and unshakable dedication to the monarchy's traditions, never openly clashed with Camilla. Instead, their exchanges were laced with civility so cold it stung. Polite words were spoken, but their eyes told a different story. Distrust, resentment, and the unspoken knowledge that they stood on opposite sides of the monarchy's future. The seeds of conflict had been planted long ago, when Camilla began to assert herself not only as Charles's partner, but as a force determined to reshape the monarchy's image. For Anne, this was intolerable. The legacy of their mother, Queen Elizabeth II, was not meant to be rebranded or bent to suit the ambitions of one woman. Anne believed deeply in duty above all else, a duty that demanded sacrifice, tradition, and the preservation of the crown's sanctity. Camilla, however, represented a new kind of power, one rooted in influence, alliances, and the steady promotion of her children and grandchildren as extensions of the royal fold. Anne watched with growing unease as Camilla maneuvered quietly but relentlessly, centralizing influence around her family. invitations extended, positions secured, and favors exchanged. It was all calculated, Anne believed, to give Camilla's bloodline a foothold in the palace's inner workings. Where Anne saw the monarchy as something sacred and collective, Camilla treated it as a kingdom to be molded, even conquered, if it meant ensuring her place and her family's survival within it. The tension between them was never simply personal. It was ideological, a clash between two visions of monarchy itself. When Queen Elizabeth passed, the silent rivalry erupted into something far more dangerous. Without the Queen's steadying hand, Camilla stepped boldly into the space left behind, no longer cautious in her pursuit of prominence. Her appearances multiplied, her voice grew louder, and her confidence swelled, as if she were not merely queen consort, but sovereign in her own right. For Anne, this was nothing short of betrayal. Their mother had spent her life preserving the monarchy's dignity, and now Anne saw Camilla's every move as a distortion of that legacy. The encroachment on tradition was no longer subtle. It was a declaration of dominance. Anne's anger, though rarely displayed, was unyielding. To her, Camilla's ascent was not earned through sacrifice or unwavering service, but secured through manipulation and convenience. She had watched her mother endure decades of pressure, heartbreak, and solitude for the sake of the throne. And now she watched Camilla stride in with an air of entitlement. Anne could not forgive it, and she would not allow it to stand unchallenged. In her eyes, Camilla's power play dishonored Elizabeth's memory, a violation of the very values the crown was meant to uphold. It was this fire that pushed Anne into making her most audacious move, the decision to name Catherine as her chosen successor. It was not merely about elevating Catherine, but about drawing a line in the sand. By publicly choosing Catherine, Anne was rebuking Camilla's influence and reclaiming the monarchy from what she saw as an opportunist's grasp. It was a confrontation, wrapped in subtlety but burning with defiance, one that transformed whispers into an open declaration of war. If Camilla symbolized change through force, then Catherine represented something Anne believed the monarchy desperately needed: grace, loyalty, and Diana's spirit reborn. Catherine never asked for Anne's crown, but destiny rarely asks permission. For years, she had quietly carried the burden of expectation, admired for her composure, her patience, and her ability to stand firm in moments that would have broken others. Unlike many who married into the monarchy, she had not sought to bend the institution to her will, but to blend modern life with the weight of tradition. This balance made her both relatable and respectable, someone who could attend a gala one night and walk her children to school the next morning without losing either grace or authenticity. To the public, she was the embodiment of a future monarch, who would honor the past while guiding the crown into a new age. What Catherine did not know, however, was that Anne had been watching. The Princess Royal was not a woman given to flattery or indulgence. She studied Catherine with the same critical eye she had turned on generations of courtiers. And in every crisis, from the scandals that threatened to overshadow the crown, to the moments when Catherine stood by William's side during his darkest trials, Anne saw not fragility, but strength. Catherine's resilience was not loud or aggressive. It was quiet, steady, and rooted in something far deeper than ambition. Where others stumbled, Catherine endured. That endurance was the quality Anne knew would be needed to secure the monarchy's survival. But Catherine was more than strong, she was beloved. Her warmth as a mother, her compassion in public, her ability to connect with ordinary people echoed a memory that had never left the nation. Diana. To millions, Catherine's gentle touch and radiant presence carried the same spirit that Diana once embodied. She became a living reminder of a mother lost, a bridge between what had been taken and what could still be reclaimed. The press seized on this image, calling her the people's hope, a phrase that spread across headlines with the force of prophecy. Catherine was no longer just a princess. She was seen as a beacon of something greater, something destined. Anne, who had devoted her life to the Queen's service, recognized in Catherine qualities that mirrored their late mother's quiet dignity. She saw a woman who understood restraint, who did not crave the spotlight, but commanded it when it came. Elizabeth had ruled with calm authority, never chasing adoration, but receiving it through unwavering devotion. Catherine, in her silence and subtle strength, carried that same quality. For Anne, it was not just resemblance, it was continuation. To her, Catherine represented the thread that bound Elizabeth's legacy to the future. Yet Catherine herself trembled at the thought. Beneath the poised smile and graceful posture lay private fears she rarely voiced. She worried about being unprepared, about not possessing the steel required for the battles ahead. She knew that public adoration was a gift, but also a curse, one that could turn in an instant. And now, with Anne thrusting her name into a succession struggle, Catherine feared she was being pulled into a war she had not chosen, one that could consume her family, her peace, and perhaps even her spirit. To the world, she was radiant and strong. To Anne, she was the only answer. But to herself, she was uncertain, unsure whether she could carry both the people's dreams and the monarchy's burdens without breaking. This tension, hidden behind a veil of composure, was the very reason Anne believed she must rise. It was her reluctance that made her worthy, her humility that made her strong. But Anne's shocking move wasn't simply a gesture of admiration. It was a calculated strike in a royal war that had been brewing for years. Locked away for decades was a sealed document, one that revealed Anne's true intentions long before the world knew. Behind the stately walls of Clarence House, whispers told of a room few had ever entered, a vault of secrets where the monarchy's most sensitive papers were hidden away. Some dismissed it as legend, a fanciful tale spun by palace staff to add mystique to an already secretive family. But others swore they had seen Anne herself enter that chamber, carrying files wrapped in the Queen's crest, her face set in a grim determination that revealed more than words ever could. It was said that these documents were not ordinary correspondence or forgotten records, but the writings of Queen Elizabeth in her final years, notes, letters, and reflections that had never been shared with the public. According to rumor, the Queen had written of her hopes for the monarchy beyond her lifetime, hopes that did not always align with the cold rigidity of official protocol. And it was Anne, her most dutiful and loyal child, who became the custodian of those private words. She was entrusted to guard them, not for herself, but for the moment when truth would matter more than silence. Among these papers were whispers of succession wishes that strayed from the expected path. Elizabeth, ever aware of the fragility of public trust, had recognized the dangers that loomed after her passing. She knew the crown could not survive on tradition alone. It needed the anchor of love, respect, and genuine connection to the people. The world, she feared, would not accept Camilla as the heart of the monarchy, no matter what law decreed. And so, in ink only Anne could confirm, she hinted at another path, one that pointed toward Catherine as the guiding hand of the future. Anne, reading those words, felt the weight of both comfort and burden. She had always shared her mother's vision of the monarchy as service, not privilege. And when she saw Catherine rise to every challenge with quiet dignity, she understood why Elizabeth had placed her hopes there. Catherine carried a balance between tradition and change, a thread of continuity that linked Diana's compassion with Elizabeth's steadfast duty. In those secret documents, it was Catherine's name that appeared, shining in a place where Camilla surely expected her own. This revelation transformed Anne's resolve into certainty. She was not simply choosing Catherine out of personal admiration. She was fulfilling a hidden promise, one born from her mother's last wishes. The sealed papers became her justification, her shield, and her weapon in the silent war against Camilla's growing influence. To Anne, it was not rebellion. It was obedience to the truest version of the monarchy her mother had envisioned. And yet, the existence of these documents was never confirmed, never spoken of openly. They lived in rumor, in careful hints, in the silence of a princess who never explained herself fully. But when Anne stepped forward and named Catherine as her chosen successor, those whispers suddenly gained credibility. The world began to wonder, was this choice born in the present, or had it been written into history long ago, waiting for the right moment to surface? When those whispers collided with Anne's public choice, the fury inside Buckingham Palace reached a boiling point. For Camilla, this wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. And humiliation demands revenge. The announcement had struck her like a blow she never anticipated. For years, she had endured whispers, endured comparisons, endured the cruel shadow of Diana. But now, to be cast aside by Anne Elizabeth's only daughter, a woman whose loyalty to the crown was unquestionable was a humiliation too great to hide. Behind closed doors, Camilla reportedly broke down in fury and despair, her composure collapsing under the weight of what she saw as the ultimate insult. In those moments of rage, the Queen Consort's allies began their counterattack. They knew that silence was surrender, and so the leaks began. Anonymous briefings to favored journalists painted Anne as bitter, isolated, even jealous of Camilla's influence. Catherine, too, was dragged into the storm. Stories emerged portraying her as fragile, unready, unfit to shoulder the burden Anne had thrust upon her. The press turned the rivalry into spectacle. Headlines screamed of a battle between the Queen and the People's Princess. The palace, once cloaked in restraint, was now an arena of open war, its conflicts dissected daily before a world hungry for scandal. Within the royal dining rooms, the atmosphere grew unbearable. Dinners once stiff with formality became poisoned with unspoken accusations. Charles sat at the center of it all, caught between his sister's audacity and his wife's outrage. His attempts at neutrality satisfied no one. Camilla saw his silence as weakness. Anne viewed it as complicity. And Catherine, trapped in the crossfire, felt the icy gaze of resentment bearing down on her every move. Charles's private life had always been turbulent, but never before had. The crown itself seemed so unstable under his reign. Yet Camilla did not retreat. If Anne believed she could erase her, she was mistaken. Camilla doubled her efforts to elevate her children and grandchildren, weaving them into the fabric of royal life with newfound urgency. Appearances became bolder, statements more calculated, all designed to present her bloodline as the rightful heirs to a throne Anne sought to divert elsewhere. To Camilla, the battle was not only about her crown, it was about her family's future, and she was determined to secure it, whatever the cost. The media, eager to fan the flames, pushed the narrative of a divided monarchy into every household. Catherine was cast as the angelic rival, Camilla as the embattled queen clinging to power, and Anne as the cold, unrelenting force behind the scenes. The polarization was complete. Supporters chose sides, friendships fractured, and the monarchy's fragile unity began to crumble under the pressure of public judgment. Anne, however, remained immovable. She would not bend to Camilla's fury, nor retract her choice. To her, this was not personal but a matter of duty, a fulfillment of her mother's unspoken wishes. No amount of slander or scandal could change what she believed to be the truth. And so, even as Camilla raged louder, Anne's silence grew heavier, more powerful, more dangerous. But even as Camilla raged, it was William Catherine's husband and the future king who felt the deepest shockwaves. For William, Anne's choice wasn't just about the crown. It was about his wife, his mother, and his own destiny colliding in one devastating moment. He had lived his entire life under the shadow of Diana, haunted by her memory and by the pain of her absence. Every look from the public, every headline, every whisper in the streets carried her name. Now, as the storm surrounding Anne's shocking declaration grew louder, he saw the same burden begin to fall on Catherine. The parallels were impossible to ignore, and they left him torn between pride and fear. For the world, Catherine was not only the modern princess. She had become the echo of two women whose legacies defined the monarchy. In her tenderness, people saw Diana. In her restraint and sense of duty, they saw Elizabeth. William could not escape the realization that his wife had become a living bridge between the two most powerful women in his life. The adoration Catherine received stirred memories of Diana's luminous presence, while her quiet strength reminded him of his grandmother's unshakable composure. But for William, the comparisons were bittersweet. He knew the crown devoured those it placed on a pedestal, and he dreaded watching Catherine walk the same perilous path. In private, the conflict raged within him. Should he shield Catherine from the weight Anne had thrust upon her? Or should he allow her to rise, to embrace the destiny others insisted was hers? Protecting her meant preserving her peace, but risked betraying Anne's trust and the people's hope. Allowing her to rise meant exposing her to the relentless cruelty of the spotlight, the kind that had destroyed his mother. His silence, often, Mistaken for stoicism was, in truth, the silence of a man paralyzed by choices that felt impossible to make. Yet in the midst of his turmoil, something shifted between William and Anne. Their bond deepened as he began to understand that her decision was not made out of vanity or ambition, but out of devotion to the monarchy's survival. Anne saw Catherine's potential, but more importantly, she saw William's need for an ally. Their conversations, once formal, became conspiratorial, as though they shared a burden that no one else could grasp. It was in these exchanges that William found both comfort and torment. Comfort, in knowing he was no longer alone. Torment, in realizing that every step forward with Anne widened the chasm between him and Camilla. His distance from Camilla grew colder by the day. Where once there had been an uneasy truce, now there was only ice. Every public event, every private gathering became a test of endurance, with William's silence cutting sharper than any words could. Camilla saw in that silence not neutrality, but condemnation, and she was not wrong. William's refusal to defend her was interpreted by the nation as a quiet endorsement of Anne's will, a tacit agreement that Catherine was the rightful figure to lead the monarchy into its next chapter. But William's silence carried another weight, a warning. For he knew the fire Anne had lit could no longer be smothered, and Catherine was now at its center. He could feel the monarchy teetering on the edge of something irreversible, and every instinct told him that the storm was only beginning. And just when it seemed the palace might contain the fire, a revelation emerged that turned suspicion into open warfare. Buried in a drawer, sealed with the Queen's own crest, was a letter that shattered the last illusions of unity. For months, it had lain unnoticed, hidden among private belongings, until a trusted aide stumbled upon it and passed it into Anne's careful hands. The handwriting was unmistakable, steady, deliberate, and royal in every stroke. Queen Elizabeth II had spoken from beyond the grave, and what she revealed carried the power to destroy the fragile balance the monarchy had been clinging to. The letter was addressed to Anne alone, a personal communication that bypassed her brothers, Charles included. Its tone was sober, its message chilling. In it, the Queen confessed her fears of what might follow her death. She wrote of dangers lurking in the future, of fractures that would widen without her guiding presence. And then, in lines that would ignite fury and disbelief, she named Catherine as the one who could steady the crown, the one who embodied the future balance of crown and people. It was not flattery, but a warning. Elizabeth feared that without Catherine's grace and loyalty, the bond between monarchy and nation would eventually collapse. Even more damning were the words that followed, words that cut like a blade through the palace hierarchy. The Queen hinted that Camilla must never be allowed to hold ultimate power. Though she acknowledged Charles's love for his wife, she questioned whether the nation would ever truly accept her as the heart of the crown. To Elizabeth, Camilla represented division, not unity, and her presence risked undoing everything the monarchy had built over centuries. That suspicion, written in the Queen's own hand, was now undeniable. Anne, holding the letter, felt the truth of her own instincts confirmed. Her public declaration naming Catherine was not a rash move, not rebellion, but an act of loyalty to her mother's vision. The Queen's words gave her justification, the foundation upon which to stand firm against Camilla's fury and Charles's hesitation. With this letter, Anne was no longer alone in her defiance. She carried her mother's voice like a weapon, one that could silence critics and rally supporters to her side. But the monarchy was not built to withstand such revelations. Once whispers of the letter spread beyond Anne's circle, the damage was instant and irreparable. The press pounced, presenting the letter as the Queen's true will, as though it overruled every legal decree and every ceremonial act. To the public, it was confirmation that Catherine had been chosen not only by Anne, but by Elizabeth herself. And in that belief, the tide shifted even further against Camilla. Inside the palace, fury raged. Charles was humiliated, caught between his wife's indignation and his sister's determination. Camilla, already wounded by Anne's declaration, now faced the unbearable weight of Elizabeth's judgment. To her enemies, the letter was proof she had never belonged. To her supporters, it was a betrayal from beyond the grave. Either way, the monarchy's image fractured like glass under pressure, the cracks spreading faster than anyone could contain. The Queen had written her words as guidance, a plea for the monarchy's survival. But once exposed, they became a prophecy Anne was determined to fulfill, no matter the cost. But the Queen's words were not just guidance, they were prophecy. And prophecy carries the weight of destiny. What began as whispers inside palace walls erupted into a nation-divided Camilla's crown versus Catherine's destiny. Outside Buckingham Palace, the tension was no longer contained to private rooms and sealed letters. It spilled into the streets, where crowds gathered with placards raised high, their voices echoing through the air like a verdict waiting to be delivered. Some carried banners that read, "Catherine our Queen," as if Anne's words had already been carved into law. For them, Catherine was not just a royal consort, but the rightful figure to lead the monarchy into a new era. Others, however, stood, firm in their loyalty to Camilla, demanding respect for her official title, insisting that to question her position was to question the crown itself. The monarchy had always thrived on unity, but now it found itself torn apart by a war of loyalty that no decree could silence. The media seized the chaos with ruthless precision. Global headlines turned the rift into theater, branding it the second Diana moment. Images of Catherine flooded the front pages, her every expression dissected, her every step compared to Diana's iconic past. Once again, the world saw a woman who had not asked for such a burden but had been chosen by fate to carry it. The coverage framed Catherine as the beloved outsider turned savior, while Camilla was cast as the embattled queen whose crown seemed to weigh heavier with each passing day. The narrative was simple, irresistible, and devastating. A queen chosen by law versus a queen chosen by the people. Anne, who had ignited this storm, knew she could not stay silent any longer. For decades she had avoided the spotlight, preferring duty over recognition, but now she stepped into the glare with deliberate force. She defended her decision publicly, speaking not with sentiment, but with conviction. Her words echoed her mother's values, stressing service, loyalty, and the survival of the monarchy as greater than any single individual's claim. Anne's declaration only deepened the divide, for her unwavering stance reassured Catherine's supporters, but enraged Camilla's defenders, who saw it as an unforgivable act of betrayal. Catherine, meanwhile, found herself caught in an unbearable paradox. The public's adoration grew by the day, their chants of support following her wherever she went. Yet behind closed doors, she was weary, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of expectation placed upon her. She confided to those closest to her that she feared becoming a symbol rather than a person, trapped between Anne's faith, Camilla's rage, and a nation that seemed determined to turn her into the embodiment of its hopes and sorrows. The crown was not yet hers, but its weight already pressed upon her shoulders. The survival of the monarchy, once thought secure in continuity, now rested not on bloodlines or decrees, but on a question that divided the realm. Who did the people trust more? Camilla, the queen by law, or Catherine, the queen of hearts? The latter answer was being shouted in streets, debated in parliament halls, and broadcast across the world. Every cheer, every protest, every headline added to the pressure, tightening the noose around the monarchy's fragile unity. And as the people roared their judgment, Anne prepared to make one final move that no one saw coming. With cameras rolling, the Princess Royal stood before the nation and declared a truth that will echo through royal history forever. Her voice, steady yet charged with an almost haunting certainty, carried the weight of generations. Anne did not equivocate, did not soften her words. She publicly named Catherine as her chosen successor, sealing the choice that had ignited months of speculation. In that instant, the monarchy's future was no longer tethered to whispers, documents, or hidden letters. It was spoken aloud for the world to hear. The room fell into a silence so sharp it seemed to fracture time itself. Courtiers shifted uncomfortably. Dignitaries stared wide-eyed. And at the edge of the hall, Camilla stood visibly shaken, her crown suddenly feeling less like a symbol of victory and more like a fragile ornament under siege. William's eyes filled with tears, torn between pride for the woman he loved and fear for the weight she had just inherited. To him, Anne's words were both a blessing and a curse, binding Catherine to a destiny that could either secure the monarchy or destroy it. Catherine's acceptance was not triumphant, but deeply emotional, framed as reluctant duty rather than ambition. She spoke softly, acknowledging the honor while confessing her resolve to serve the people above all else. In that moment, her humility only strengthened her claim in the eyes of the nation. What Anne had ignited became undeniable. The monarchy's balance of power had been rewritten in a single speech, and as the world absorbed the shock, it became clear that it was not Charles, but Anne, who may have secured the monarchy's future with this act of defiance and faith. But as Anne's words echoed across the globe, one question lingered in every heart. Was this the monarchy's salvation, or the beginning of its final reckoning? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.